Well, after the first of the year, we switch obviously from the Christmas narrative to the life of Christ, the teachings, temptations. We'll be studying chapters 4 through 9 during January and February. What are some of the things we ought to be looking for there as we prepare to teach those lessons?
Yeah. Well, I do think here, especially in those first few chapters, we've got these key stories, so I focus on them. But then we settle into the regular rhythm of the gospel, which is really kind of short account after short account, little story after little story, interspersed with teaching sections as we go along. And I think the most helpful way to go about across the whole thing is asking those key questions. What is Jesus doing? How are the people responding? How is he identified? I think I said it a little differently that time, but those same three questions. So let's just do that just a little bit here ourselves. And for the sake of it, I'm going to reach back to chapter 3. And I'll just say at the beginning of chapter 3, the first two verses is probably stuff that first verse and a half or so, we probably tend to skip over because it's in the day of this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. That's really striking. We see Luke here doing history again. He's being very particular about when this happens. But he's introducing John the Baptist, and he's also sounding a whole lot like the Old Testament histories when they introduce prophets. Many of the prophets start with, in the however many year of King so-and-so, the word of the Lord came to. Many of the writing prophets, that's the first verse. For Isaiah that you just finished, it's in the 6th chapter. And the year that King Uzziah died, the word of the Lord came. So that's exactly what John's doing. John the Baptist. Luke is saying about John. So part of what Luke is telling us is this is an Old Testament prophet, or this is a prophet in that mode, if you will, like one of those. So we find him, and he's introducing, and it closes with, he tells us, I'm not the Messiah. They think he is. But one is coming, and it closes then with Jesus before the genealogy. And we have the Holy Spirit coming upon him and the voice from heaven, you are my beloved son. So this setting up, this is who he is. How is he identified? The genealogy works into how he's identified as well, showing that he's son of David, son of Adam. Matthew takes it only back to David. He's making the point he's the Jewish Messiah. Luke taking it all the way back to Adam, maybe doing a few things, but at least one of them, he's getting back to, again, all of humanity. Everybody descended from Adam. Jesus is for them. And Jesus then about to launch his public ministry, but first we have the temptation. And so when we come through the temptation, what do we have? We see Jesus dealing with that. Jesus is the one who defeats Satan. That's a big deal. Where does this take place? It takes place in the wilderness, 40 days. We're supposed to catch some Old Testament echoes. 40-something in the wilderness, 40 years in the wilderness. The wilderness is the place of temptation. This is where Israel failed. Israel's in the wilderness for 40 years because they did not obey. Jesus as the new Israel, Jesus as the one who's coming to fulfill where Israel failed. Jesus is the servant of the Lord. You've just finished Isaiah. Servant of the Lord there first means, in Isaiah, first means Israel. They fail, so here's a new servant of the Lord to accomplish it. This is what Jesus is doing. So he defeats the devil. He succeeds where Israel failed. And then when we finish the temptation, it tells us that he comes in the power of the Spirit. So Jesus is somebody who works in the power of the Spirit. And then this message, the word about him goes out to all around country. And he's teaching, so that's what he's doing. And he's being glorified by all. That's how our people are responding. He's a big deal. The stories that follow are basically Jesus heals or Jesus teaches. One of those two. Jesus is doing works of power. Jesus is teaching in power. And in both of them, people are amazed. We'll try to kind of just dip down. But I encourage you as you go through each little snippet, each little story, look for how do the people respond. what I just mentioned in 4:14 is he was being glorified by all. When you come to 4:31, when he's going to heal another man there, it says that people were astonished at his teaching because his word possessed authority. Again and again, you're going to have these things. People are astonished. People are amazed. So how are they responding? Now, you're also going to have, they're astonished, they're amazed. Some are going to like what he's doing, and some are going to hate what he's doing. That's not accidental as well. Luke is telling us what happened, but also, as we encounter the teaching of Jesus, we've got to ask the question, are we going to be among those who submit to what he says, receive it, or are we going to be those who oppose what he says and reject it? Now, I want to go on to the way he's identified, but just with that idea, that I think is a key thing for each little section, going through those 3 months, I guess it is, in this quarter. What are we going to do with Jesus? How did the crowds respond? How does that tell us how we're going to respond? And to set with that one for a minute, I want to look at Jesus's time in Nazareth in Luke 4:16-30. Because he comes to Nazareth. It says, as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, which is just a great little verse. Jesus' custom, Jesus' habit was to go to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. The correlation to that now, post-resurrection, is it being our custom, our habit, to gather with the church on the Lord's day. So he does, and he stands up to read, which was the typical. So they give him the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, there we're referring to, and he reads and he sits down. This would be the typical. You stand for the Jewish synagogue, you stand to read the scriptures, you sit down to teach. And he reads this great text about the anointed one coming and bringing deliverance. And when he sits down and they all look at him, he says, today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. Man, there are a bunch of places in the Bible where I wish I had video, but this is one of them. Boom. It's happened right here, right now. And we talked about people's response. Well, all spoke well of him and marveled at the gracious words that were coming from his mouth. So, first of all, in his teaching, they said, this is great. He's amazing. He's a great teacher. Then they begin to wonder a little bit. Wait a minute. This is his hometown. Hey, we know Joseph. This is Joseph's boy, right? And they wonder about it. And Jesus is where he tells them that, a prophet isn't accepted in his own hometown. And he points out how this has happened in the Old Testament. What he does is they liked Jesus when he was saying cool things. They went, man, that's great. I haven't heard that before. I haven't seen that. That's great insight. Thanks for helping me out. I hadn't understood that before. But then Jesus went to application. And when he stepped on their toes, they didn't like that. So when you get to verse 29, let's go back to verse 28. When they heard these things, all in the synagogue were filled with wrath. And they rose up and drove him out of the town and brought him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built so that they could throw him down the cliff. It is very interesting to look at verses 28 and 29 and then back to verse 22. At verse 22, cool, man, he talks great. Verse 28 and 29, we're going to kill you. Here's a real sober word on this. I've got it written in the margin of my Bible. It's very easy for church people to hate Jesus. We need to sit with that. I'm talking about me, I'm talking about us. Because what's going on is they like the idea of Messiah coming, but they had their own idea about what Messiah ought to do. And when Messiah showed up and said, I'm the one calling the shots here, and it's going to go this way, they didn't like it very much. We all have a tendency to make God in our image instead of the other way around, and to expect God to follow our plans and to do things our way, and that is very dangerous. Because God has a way, straight way through Bible and history, to color outside of my lines and your lines. Put it another way, he has a tendency to act like he's God. And so we need to reconcile ourselves to that. It's very easy in our current setting, for the last many decades to roll along in a cultural Christianity that sees Jesus as a nice add-on. But that's always been false. Somewhere along the way, that's going to crash. Jesus shows up to bring salvation, but Jesus didn't show up to do our bidding. He shows up and he calls us to submit to him. And if we will find life in that. But we may not find what we thought we wanted. But there's a way that seems right to a man, and in the end it leads to death. That statement comes up twice in Proverbs. So we need to submit our hopes, our dreams, our plans, our ideas to God. And when he takes them and throws them away, he's just calling us to trust him that what he's going to do is going to be even better. So that's a challenge. And that text right here just brings that up. And then as we go through, you're going to keep seeing, hey, we like what Jesus is doing. We're going to follow him. And whoa, we hate what he's doing. Back and forth. And those show up at the end of almost every story. And I think they're sitting there for two reasons. One, historically it happened, but also it's sitting there to say, so which is it? What are we going to do? It's not enough just to say, hey, he's a cool teacher. I like when he talks. The question is, are we going to submit to him? And that ties into that other question, who is this man? If he is a mere human teacher, then sure, that's great. Listen to him. But if he is what all these texts keep pointing to, he's the promised Messiah, he's Son of God, he's going to reign on his Father's throne over the house of David, over the whole world, then that means we've got to submit to him. And I say you have got to, that's true, but we get to. This is where life is found. So as you go through, that's one of the things. How are people responding, and how should I respond? But also, how is Jesus identified, or who is Jesus? The people kind of get it, but the group that really understands who Jesus is early on are the demons. So that next story, when he goes to Capernaum, the people are astonished at his teaching again, but there's a guy in the synagogue with a demon. Now, we can sit on that for just a minute. I visited that synagogue twice, or actually it's a little bit later synagogue built on top of this one. But just to ponder, here in the gathered community, what today for us would be church, there's somebody with a demon. But he says, I know who you are, the Holy One of God. Jesus rebukes him. Later on in the same chapter, verse 41, demons are coming out of people and they're crying out, you are the Son of God. And he rebukes them again because they knew that he was the Christ. They're aware of what's up. There's spiritual conflict going on. It's we who tend to be slow. Jesus is rebuking them. He doesn't need the testimony of the demons, but we're able to see, hey, this is who this man is, and the whole rest of the story is going that way. Even as you get to the end of this section at chapter 9, that's probably the reason this is closed there. That is a key climax where you have Peter confessing that Jesus is the Christ. So that's kind of just that storyline of that arc there. The disciples don't quite get it. When Jesus does some amazing miracles, they wonder who he is. They begin to get some sense. You get that they understand he's not just a typical person. But then that culminates in chapter 9 with Peter's confession. And that's supposed to bring us to that confession to say, yes, I will also believe this truth that Peter has uttered. Even though Peter, he doesn't understand it in its fullness yet. He will post-resurrection. But that's the confession that we are all called to. Let me just hit and then see if there's another question. Just that, look in each of these little sections. Look for, what does Jesus do? He's every time he's either teaching or healing. And then, how do the people respond? You might even just mark these in different colored ink or something. I find that kind of interesting, just tracking that through. But astonishment, all that's typical. And then sometimes direct faith or direct opposition. And then, how is Jesus identified? Who is he? Because that is the overarching theme of the whole deal. Who is Jesus? and it's stated at that confession in chapter 9, and then it's proven there at the end of the resurrection.
So, Dr. Van Nest, would you say that one of the big ways, I guess, is kind of to trace the development of the picture of Jesus? That's a big thing to kind of hone in on with our class. That's kind of, or with our groups as we're teaching through this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it could be even fun. I don't know exactly how the lesson is going to break things up, but even to kind of keep track of from week to week. Up to this point, what do we have about who it says Jesus is? And what's added to that this time? Up to this point, what do we see about how people are responding to Jesus? Because some of the same words are used, but then sometimes some different things. And what's new here about what Jesus is doing? Are we in preaching here or healing? And how is this tweaked or developed?
For sure. Go ahead, Jerry. Hold on one second.
I am muted. Sorry about that. I was just going to say that's a great way to prepare the lessons as well, by using those 3 questions and finding that. And that leads us to, most of our 9 lessons. I mean, they have titles such as anticipated, matured, rejected, followed, reigned, loved, unashamed. And so I think those 3 questions are going to lead us to the main point based on the titles of our lessons there. Make it easier to prepare for as well.
Good.
Well, we appreciate your help. We will be back with you soon, hopefully in person. But if not, we'll do this again by Zoom. And thank you so much for helping us get ready for another great quarter of Bible study. And if there's anything we can do to help you, let us know. We'd love to.
Well, thank you very much. I always enjoy it.
Thanks a lot.